welcome everyone to our November webinar. For those of you in the United States, this is our Thanksgiving week. So some folks may already be turning minds in that direction and thawing out the turkeys and all the good. I know that's happening at my house, but regardless, we can all be thankful right now. Yeah, and so welcome to this special webinar, and again, very happy to have Marina here with us. And so, Danny, if you want to go to what our agenda is for today, I'm going to take a little bit of time here at the beginning to just give you an update on my bee yard. This has kind of become part of the webinar, and I hope you find it useful and just interesting. I have a few interesting factoids for you today, and then talk a little bit about hive tracks, what you can be doing right now, and then pretty quickly get it over to Marina because she's the star of the show today and has a lot of fantastic information for you. And I'll talk more a little bit more about that when we get to that segment. So let's go to the update from Faith Mountain Farm and the bee yard. Well, there's not much happening in the bee yard. If you want to go to the next slide, this was yesterday morning. I think I took this image. Very frosty, and the bees are hunkered down. We've had a bit of um, cold weather spells already. If you want to go back one slide, thank you. And But it's been also warm a little bit as well in so we've had these spells, right? Cold spell, then warm, and there's very few to-do items left. I'm still bottling honey. I sell honey year round, and to the local food hub that we have, and a few market shops that carry my honey. Max and I are in conference planning mode for Nobby. Just put in an advertisement for that will be there in January. So if you're coming to that, come see us there. I'm also working on honey stories, and I had clean honey room on my list last time, and it's still there. I hope it will happen before the next webinar. But again, mode ready or not, winter is on our doorstep, and so we're going to that mode. All right, next slide. I'm trying to remember what I had. There it is. Okay, so there were some last minute checks of hives, some of my hives in more remote yards that I was having trouble getting to. So that shot there on the left is a winter cluster. You can see this was an apivar kind of cleanup after an early formic treatment, and then those bees are looking good. We're also doing some honey bottling that you saw on that slide, and we'll talk more about that. That's a little bit of a preview that Max actually was helping with that bottling of that honey. There's a honey story involved there, and as part of our biodiversity monitoring work that we're doing, that I'm sure you're going to hear from more as we go. This slide right here, garlic, what does that have to do with fall? Well, it just marks the changing of the seasons. And for me and my farm, I have a pretty big garlic. Well, I don't know, it's not big, it's big for me, but several thousand garlic that I put in the ground this time of year. Just if you've never grown garlic, you should. It's super easy. All right, next slide. So another couple of things I've been doing is I planted some uh, clover, and I'm not sure. Are the slides changing for y'all? Mine's not.
They're not.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. So you should see a seeder that's got a bunch of clover seeds in it, and I'm planting some clover in a spot just to have some more pollinator friendly flowers in that area. And I told you about the pollinator plot that I've had this year, and I expect to do that again next year, but this is just a seeding of another area. And as beekeepers, as I've urged you over this season of webinars, is we should have a pretty broad view of the ecosystems that we live in and operate in. And the picture on the right those are black walnuts, if you've not seen those before. And this year was a heavy mass crop all around in my woods, including the black walnuts. And fun fact for the day, hard mast, like nuts like these, not almonds, but nuts like these are wind pollinated. They don't need the insects to pollinate them. But again, it's all part of the ecosystem and the biodiversity in the areas that we live in. So I just wanted to highlight that little factoid there. All right, next slide.
You
I
guys will
think
be so
this slide
delayed.
is, yeah, yeah. I think this slide is about what you should be doing with hive tracks when it gets there. Oh, yes, there we go. So some folks this time of year, as the bees are going broodless, they're doing oxalic acid treatments, and so be sure to record those. If your bees are already put to bed and in the cold, really when the days are warm, if you have a warm day, it's a great time to just to go out and observe entrance activity to see if they're still alive and kicking. Also, you can tap on the side of the hive and you hear this little buzz. And believe it or not, there are flowers that bloom. Witch hazel is a really interesting flower. If you've not looked at that one, it blooms from mid-October through mid-November, so it's probably done now, but it's a fascinating little flower. Henbit, I've seen people posting on socials about some henbit in North Carolina, where I'm based. And this dandelion was right outside my building yesterday afternoon. I mean, we've had, in the teens and 20s here and snow, and these dandelions, they are very resilient. As soon as they have a little window, they pop out. And so record those sorts of things. And again, if you're still bottling honey or extracting, record that information, put your honey story with that. Also, have notes for next season, things you want to highlight and remember, and invite us to speak to your beekeeping club. I've had several inquiries and already booking for next year for hive tracks to speak to your club. So if you are on your beekeeping club committee, reach out to us. We're happy to come in person or do it, through a webinar type format. So there's a few hive tracks tasks for you. All right, next.
All right.
I
Probably
think
have
this
some
is
fun.
where we transition. Okay. So go ahead and you can transition over to Marina while I give a brief introduction about our history. Marina, I looked back in my email. The internet is forever, as they say, right? And there's a history of things that I don't remember, but the digital space does. And I found an email from January of 2016 where we were planning a Skype call, uh, me and you and Raphael, I can't remember that some gentleman, and that was, our introduction. So that's 10 years ago, and so we've been crossing paths since that time. I even took a one of Marina's honey tasting classes 2 years ago, and so I'm super excited to have you here with us and share this whole space that I am excited about and value in the honey arena. And welcome to our webinar. You take it away, Marina.
Thank you, James. You read my mind because I was thinking the same thing, that our paths have crossed so many times. And finally, today, we're going to collaborate and
Yeah.
talk honey.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to talk through about sensory analysis and this method of evaluating honey, which I call the missing link. And the reason I call it the missing link is because it's been largely ignored, not explored in this country in relationship to honey. When beekeepers want to know about their honey, the first thing they usually do is think of sending their samples to a lab to have the pollen evaluated and believing that this is the way to identify the botanical source. But in fact, bees don't make honey from pollen, they make it from nectar. And there are different morphology. Every plant, every flower drops different quantities of pollen in the honey. And then you have to also consider that there's thousands of bees coming from various nectar sources dropping pollen. So doing a pollen spectrum is not necessarily the way to identify botanical source, but it is really reliable for pinpointing geographic origin because of all the different flowers that would grow or in a particular region. The pollen spectrum can also tell us a little bit about blending honey or what's been filtered out. Um, and, this is definitely a valuable test. And the next test is common is doing chemical analysis of your honey. And this generally is looking for authenticity. The number one thing I think beekeepers want to know is, was there sugar added to the honey? Was it compromised? Are there pesticides? And was this honey heated? Is it raw? And that's the value of chemical analysis. But sensory analysis is using our senses to evaluate honey. And this was developed in Italy over 40 years ago. And through formal training, anybody can learn this method of sensory analysis, which we teach in the classroom. And it's a way to identify botanical sources when the characteristics are already known. It's also a way to create what I call honey literacy. It's a way to describe the indescribable, the smells and the flavors through using a common vocabulary. You've seen the honey wheels. There's quite a few out there now, but it's basically using real words to describe honey, like woody, aromatic, rather than saying, well, this honey is yummy and this honey is delicious and I really like it. So it's a way to elevate honey by using real words to describe honey. And all of the descriptors that we use for honey are objective, meaning when we describe a honey as being bitter or having a little bit of an animal funk to it, these are objective assessments. It's not negative. When we say a honey is bitter or a honey has a very funky, fishy smell or, some kind of an animal odor, something a little bit that we're not familiar with. So we're very objective when we are evaluating honey. And with sensory analysis, it's a way to confirm defects and you can detect foreign particles in the honey. So when we talk about defects, we're referring to overusing smoke during an inspection or during harvest. The smell gets into the beeswax, gets into the honey, and your honey has this aromatic smell of smoke or ashes, which is usually the fault of the beekeeper. So different kinds of defects can be evaluated through sensory analysis. And it's not the only way. It complements the pollen and the chemical work that's done in the lab. But sensory analysis, anyone can do it with proper training. And I'm going to walk us through what exactly that.
Oops. You accidentally muted yourself, so
Okay, I'm
there
back.
you go. You're back. Okay.
So thank you for that. So how did I get here? How did I end up being so deeply involved in honey education? So like most beekeepers, I started beekeeping as a hobby back in 2000. I was introduced to bees by a neighbor. I had no idea anything about bees. Matter of fact, I was petrified of bees. And like most beekeepers, I was collecting honey. People were giving me samples of honey. I was gifted honey, and whenever I would travel. So I had quite a collection of honey on the shelves that I would look at every day. And I would admire the colors, I would admire the labels and the countries they were from and some of the details of maybe the botanical sources. But I had no words or no way to appreciate them, how to taste them, how to um, talk about them. I would tell a friend, hey, I got this really interesting honey from Turkey. I don't know how to describe it. It's dark and it's sweet. So I just kept searching. I was really curious. I mean, the amount of botanical sources globally and the different kinds of honeys available on a global scale are immeasurable. And I was searching of a way to talk about honey. And I spent a little bit time working in the wine industry. And as we know, the wine industry has fully developed a vocabulary, a tasting protocol, how wine experts taste and smell and evaluate wine. And it's similar with chocolate, coffee. And I thought, why honey? Why don't we have a way to appreciate honey? So I stumbled upon this program in Italy back in 2013. I was at a honey festival and I found out about a program that they had in Bologna, Italy. It was essentially a honey sommelier course. So back in 2013, I signed up for the first course. It was 3 levels. I returned and completed the course and training in about 2015. My brain and my head exploded with the amount of knowledge and research and data collecting that they had done on honey. I felt very, very compelled to bring this to the US. So I worked very closely with the teachers. We translated the program and their courses. And now, since 2015, we've been doing these classes here in the US. In 2017, we had the first level, uh, and the organization that certifies the students is called the Italian National Register of Honey Experts. And, they carefully curate the class, and everything has to meet their standards in order for the students to receive the certification. So sensory analysis is used to evaluate every other artist in food and beverage, and it's really never been used for honey. And I highly recommend that if you're interested in learning how to taste, if you finally, decide that you want to take a course, I also highly recommend that you go and you learn the tasting program or the protocol for wine, olive oil, cheese, coffee, because it's all really similar. And it's all about um, just sharpening your senses and being aware of a wide range of smells and flavors. And this will keep your senses sharp. So if you have the opportunity, I highly recommend go to a cheese tasting, go to a chocolate tasting, go to a tea tasting. This is going to expand your what we call scent experiences, or your taste experiences, and this is going to add to your ability to use it towards honey tasting. So essentially, sensory analysis, we're hoping, will create a database to match the botanical sources or the floral sources to their sensory characteristics. And in Italy, they have created a database of all of their honeys and exactly what they should look, smell, and taste like. It's pretty amazing, but this has been done with wine and chocolate and cheese and every other food. And now we're going to start doing this with honey by looking at the color, the smell, the flavor, and taking notes and creating a database so that we know what our honeys are and what their characteristics should be. So we know every drop of honey has these unique characteristics, color, aroma, flavor, and even texture, depending upon the flowers visited by the bees. And here's a nice picture of the variety of some of the honeys that I had collected. And there's thousands, hundreds of species of flowers that bees visit, and thousands more around the world that bees gather to make nectar. So the amount of honey and flavors and diversity is pretty endless. You really don't see it happening the same over and over. And this is because of what we call the terroir effect. So essentially, it has to do with the botanical source, primarily is responsible for the flavors of the honey, but also where that botanical source is growing. It can be the climate will affect that plant, when it will bloom, the geography of the land, whether the plant is growing near the water, near a plain, on a mountainside, and also the soil or the geology of where that plant is growing. So all of these variables, these unpredictable environmental variables affect the characteristics of the honey, what it's going to look and smell and taste like. So we don't have control over this. And terroir is something that we see used with wine. And again, other artisan foods, the flavor will change depending upon where those foods were produced, what the environment was, what the climate, the geography, the geology is. So foods made in nature are always going to be changed, and honey fits into that category. So let's get down to business. How do we apply the method of sensory analysis? How do we evaluate honey? What are the steps that we use to look at honey and create a flavor profile? So we look at step by step the color, we smell the honey, we'll taste it in the mouth. So we have taste and flavor, which we use interchangeably, but in sensory analysis, they mean two completely different things. Talk about that in a minute. And the texture. So we're going to look at all of these sensory characteristics of the honey and take notes. So you might have seen pictures of tasting honey with wine glasses, and you might say, well, why do you use a wine glass? So if you ever tasted honey or smelt the honey, you unscrew the jar, the honey is all the way filled to the top, and you stick your nose there and you try to smell it. You really can't gather any of those molecules, any of those volatiles. So by putting the honey into a balloon shaped glass, what we use is what I call a smear and smell technique. So we take a spoon and we smear it around the edge of the container. And this allows you to stick your nose in there, and you will be amazed at how much you can gather information on smell compared to just unscrewing the lid. And if you've never done this, I highly recommend that you go to your honey, get a couple of 2 teaspoons of it, put it in a glass, or like a round wine glass, smear it around. We use plastic spoons that are not corn based. I don't say don't use wood because you're going to taste wood. Um, and I wouldn't use metal, but if you have it, use what you have and stick your nose in there, and you will be amazed at what you can smell. So this is important because we gather most of the information on flavor through our nose. And again, I will talk about that. So the first thing we do is we look at the colors of honey. We decide what the color is. I recommend using sort of an artist palette to describe color, because I think everybody understands, well, my honey is yellow, golden yellow. My honey is amber with red. My honey is dark amber. And the color of honey matters. It matters especially when it comes to certain botanical sources. We know that black locust honey is light, should be very, very light in color. Buckwheat and things like avocado are very, very dark amber. We know that sourwood, we look for sort of a lighter amber, very, very light, maybe a yellow, but there's also a gray tone, a gray tint to it that we look for. With linden, we're doing again a light golden yellow, but we're looking for a greenish hue to it. So when it comes to a honey competition in Italy, the color matters. If the honey does not conform to what the colors have been established, it would lose points in a competition. And the way we judge honey in the US is very, very different. But the way that honey is judged in Italy is very similar to how other artisan foods are judged. So color matters to a certain extent when we're talking about various botanical sources. And we know that honey gets darker as it ages. If you have a jar of honey on the shelf for 2 or 3 years, you'll notice that it gets darker if it started out light. And when it's crystallized, it generally tends to look a little bit lighter. So going back to taste versus flavor. Now, when we talk about taste, we are specifically referring to the five sensations that we experience on our tongue. And those are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and something called umami, which is a savoriness. Think about soy sauce, something very savory. And these are how we experience taste on our tongue. So when we're tasting, I know sometimes people tend to use lemon in their water to cleanse their palate, but that's going to conflict with identifying the sour taste sensation on your tongue. So we don't use lemon when we cleanse our palate because we want to be able to identify sour. So some honeys are sour, honey's acidic. So taste refers to all of these five sensations that we experience on our taste buds, which are on our tongue, our soft palate, even down our throat. While you're swallowing honey, you are still tasting it. So that's what we talk about when we're referring to taste. Now, flavor, on the other hand, is all of these other flavors that we experience when we're tasting honey or any other food. And this is the wheel, the honey aroma flavor wheel from my book. And essentially, it is a tool to get us to start using real words to describe honey. And it's very, very difficult to put words to smells and flavors. It's not something that we normally do. But in the classroom, when we have this training, we have a series of exercises that will sharpen your senses and sort of teach you how to start talking about honey using real words. Now, if you've never used one of these wheels, essentially in the center of the wheel is what we have or call broad flavor families. These are sensations that we experience on a broader category. So you would start in the middle and you would say, this honey is a floral honey and it's reminiscent of flowers. And it could be, violets, it could be honeysuckle, jasmine. Every single word that we need to describe honey is not on here, but it's just a tool to start. So if you're tasting a honey and you decide that it's magnolia and magnolia is not on the wheel, that is fine. The honey tastes or smells like magnolia flowers. And you go around the wheel, there's fruity. I think most people can recognize fruity. It reminisces different kinds of fruits, could be berries, dried fruit, citruses, and so on. Warm is a word to describe honeys that generally are confectionery or lactic, sort of milky. It can be sort of a burnt milk, a caramel, nutty. So warm tends to be this kind of sensation around confection, sweetness, and lactic. Then we have what we call refreshing. This is an aromatic kind of quality. I like to describe this as a honey that kind of opens up your nose when you're smelling it or tasting it, similar to like maybe Vicks Vapor Rub or Tiger Balm. Think about rosemary, eucalyptus, those kind of aromatic smells. And we see this with basswood honey. You get that menthol kind of note towards the end. The next category is vegetals. So this is anything that's plant-based. So it can be green or dry, fresh cut grass, hay, tea, anything that's around a vegetal um, sensation. And then we move on to animal. So here we go. Questionable funkiness in honey is very common. If we describe a honey as being gamey or smells like a horse stall or pigsty or dirty socks, gym bag. Again, these are objective. We are not describing them. We are acknowledging that the honey is funky. Doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's just the chemical composition or the volatile compounds in that honey. And we're allowed to say this honey tastes like cat pee or smells like cat pee. It usually smells. You don't usually get it in the mouth. It usually comes in the nose and then it's gone in the mouth, which is very interesting. Then we move on to woody. So anything that has to do with wood, spicy, resinous, propolis, fresh cut wood, old wood, moldy wood. And then we move on to chemical and spoiled. So there are some honeys on a global scale that we will come across that, we would describe as having a chemical, medicinal, um, ashy, metallic, funky cabbage smell. So a chemical. And then spoiled. Because of the natural yeast found in honey, we will get honeys that are kind of smelling or tasting a little bit fermented and musty mushrooms. Again, if we're saying that our honey smells like moldy, musty, yeasty, it's not a negative. It's just what we smell. And it is what that honey is described as. So this is a tool to help us to use these words to elevate honey and to start like a conversation. And again, every word is not on here. So if you have something that comes to mind when you're tasting a honey, you are allowed to use that. And, this is not the law, but it is just a tool to start. So our nose is thousands of times more sensitive than our sense of taste, and humans can detect 40,000 different odors. And remember, taste is only sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. But our nose can detect thousands and thousands of different odors. And those are the ones that were on the previous slide, which we call flavor. We actually experience flavor with our nose. And using our nose as a tool to gather the flavors of a honey is really powerful. It's amazing. We think that our nose is not as powerful and sensitive as like a dog's nose, but in fact, through proper training and constantly sharpening your senses, you start to realize how powerful and sensitive our nose really is. And over time with practice, you will be able to smell just about anything everywhere all the time. It's almost a curse, but it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. because this kind of training makes you much more aware and your senses become super sharp. Now, the thing about scent, it's directly connected to our memories. So smells can remind us of events, person, places, things, even a moment in time. You may go somewhere and smell perfume, and it may remind you of a family member that always wore something very floral. You may smell certain things that remind you of a vacation or somebody's gym bag socks or, a wedding that you went to. So we each have our own what we call scent memories, and they come out a lot when we're tasting honey. Somebody will say, "Oh, well, this honey reminds me of, my Thanksgiving cranberry sauce that we always make." So it's very personal, but our sense of smell is really very powerful. It also can influence our emotions and our mood. And if you know anything about aromatherapy, people use certain uh, essential oils to alter their mood, like lavender to calm down or peppermint to wake up. So it's very, very powerful, our sense of smell. And with the training that we do, it can really unlock and open up scent memories and expand your what we call smell vocabulary. So, how do we experience smell as humans? Well, when we're evaluating honey, the first thing we do is this smearing the honey around the sides of the container, and we smell it directly through our nose. The second way that we smell is by putting the honey into your mouth on your tongue and inhaling so that the volatile compounds go up to your olfactory bulb where your brain tries to identify it. So when you're tasting a honey that you're not familiar with, those compounds, those molecules will go up to your olfactory bulb and try to describe it. Now, with training, your brain will say, oh, that one is very, you know, woody. This one will be, floral, fruity. With training, your brain will easily identify what you're tasting. But when you don't really have that training and you don't really have the vocabulary and the memory of what floral, fruity, woody smells and tastes like, when it's not really embedded into your brain, your olfactory bulb does not have words to put to it. So this is why it's really important to become a good experienced honey taster is to have a good memory. That's really the secret, is having a good memory and a wide range of vocabulary words on the tip of your tongue to describe the honeys. Now, the last thing that happens when we're tasting honey is what we call trigeminal tactile sensations. So our face has a network of trigeminal nerves. And when you put something in your mouth, it travels through those trigeminal network and goes to your brain. It also evokes different kinds of sensations. So some of them are physical, and you can taste a honey that what we describe as astringent, which is not taste and it's not flavor, it's what we call a tactile sensation. So if you've ever had red wine or black tea, you might recognize that kind of dry, puckering mouth from the tannins in your mouth. So we do have honeys that we can describe as having this characteristic of astringency. There's also chemical reactions that happen. Now, we have warm, cool, and peppery. So when we talk about a honey that is warm, it's separate than temperature. It really has to do with the maltose sugars in it. Think about chocolate chip cookies, how they have sort of this warming sensation, and the chocolate chips have this maltose, which gives you kind of a warm feeling, and it's not temperature related. And this can happen with honey. On the other side, you can have a cooling sensation, and this typically happens with honey that is crystallized with very, very fine crystals. You'll notice that when you put it on your tongue, it's immediately kind of cooling. But again, it's not temperature related. This is a chemical reaction that is part of our trigeminal network. And then any kind of spiciness in the honey. I tasted a spicy honey at Appomondia at the Global Honey Bar, and it was Euphorbia honey from Morocco. And when I swallowed it, it literally was so peppery, it burned my throat. And I had never tasted this honey before. And at that moment, my experience of honey had just completely expanded, because I have tasted the bitterest honey, and I've tasted the sweetest honey and the peppery, most peppery honey. And so now I can talk about that, the sensation of a super peppery honey. And again, it's not flavor, it's not taste, it would be a trigeminal tactile sensation. And of course, our trigeminal network acknowledges temperature, but you have physical, chemical, and you also have temperature. But temperature of the honey really has to do with the environment, whether the honey was in the refrigerator or it's just, really hot day. So temperature has to do with the actual temperature of the honey. And for this reason, when we are using palate cleansers to taste honey, we don't use ice, partly because ice numbs your tongue, and you can't really taste anything when your mouth or your tongue is cold. You can't experience true flavor and taste. It's like eating ice cream. When your tongue gets too cold, you stop tasting the flavor. So you let the ice cream melt a little bit so that you can really taste it at room temperature. So room temperature is the best way to taste honey. And the last evaluation has to do with the texture. So whether the honey is liquid or crystallized or somewhere in between. Also, we acknowledge the structure of the crystals. Is the crystal structure evenly throughout? Is it separated, like the picture in the middle, or is it what we call incomplete crystallization because the honey was heated? So the honey on the right, that crystal structure means that the honey was heat treated, or it's very, very old. And the center with the stripe, this is post-crystallization. So you have a nice crystal structure. The honey's crystallized throughout over time. Eventually, the glucose will separate from the water because it's less soluble than the fructose, and you get what we call separation phase. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but in the classroom, we have a whole exercise on crystallization and good quality and poor quality structure. So there's a very deep dive into crystallization and the structures of the crystals. The last thing is that once you start doing this kind of work, you'll start to realize how sensitive you become to your environment, light, noise, different kinds of foreign smells or odors, and the temperature. In the beginning, it may not affect you, but when you really get into using your senses over and over to evaluate honey, you'll start to realize that you don't you don't feel comfortable around noisy environments. You can't concentrate, or the temperature of the room is too cold. You become really sensitive to your environment. And it happens pretty much after the first class. You really expand your ability to sense not only the honey, but your environment. Also, if you're fatigued physically or mentally, again, it will compromise a little bit, how you can evaluate the honey. I know that when I was traveling to Italy for the classes, I was not only physically exhausted from the jet lag and the travel, I had a certain amount of mental fatigue, and I found it really difficult to concentrate in the classroom and to focus on what am I smelling, what am I tasting. So it's really important to be rested when you take these classes because fatigue can really affect how you um, experience honey. And then again, just general health issues can affect your ability to taste honey. But I should tell you that mental and physical fatigue, if you are feeling fatigued and you're tasting your honeys, this is a temporary situation. Next week, you might be much more rested. Your senses will change. We're human. And there's certain days I'll taste the honey and I'll say, I don't taste anything. It's just not there for me. But the next week, somebody will crack open a pail of buckwheat honey and I can smell it across the room. So you always have to keep in mind that we're human and our senses don't always work perfectly because of various factors of our environment and our physical. So you'll kind of notice this after you go through some of the training, but they're temporary. So now let's take a look at how an actual evaluation would look. So here is the honey sensory profile sheet that we use. And essentially, we just have fill in the different areas. So on the top left, you'll see here the visual evaluation. We taste the honey, and we decide whether it's liquid or crystallized. The aspect is part of the visual evaluation. We're basically looking for foreign particles, foam, bee parts, any kind of separation if it's crystallized. And then the last thing we look at is the color. Then we move to the right top, which is the smell evaluation. The first thing we always look at is the intensity or the volume, so to speak, of what that honey smells like. So we usually have a delicate, medium, or intense level of intensity of what that honey is. This is a profile for the sweet clovers, I should say, right? From the Dakotas. Then we have um, describing it using the wheel or using whatever words we need to use to describe it. So vegetal, dry hay, chamomile, sweet tobacco, a little spice nose, and sometimes a little animal funk. Then we move to the bottom left, and this is the evaluation of the honey in the mouth. So we go back to intensity. Sometimes a honey will smell different than the flavor when it's in your mouth. So sometimes the intensity of the honey can be strong, but in the mouth, it's mellow. So it's not always the same. The smell and the flavor intensity can change. This is something I see a lot with mostly with honeys. The smell is different than the flavor. The intensity is different. Then again, we move to describing the honey in the mouth. May not always be the same. So we use the wheel again and whatever words we want, and we will describe what we're tasting in that honey. We'll also look at the persistence of that flavor, the aftertaste, and the sweet, sour, salty, bitter. Could be a little bit sour. Then we move to texture, bottom right. So we look at the consistency overall of that honey. We look at the crystal structure and, maybe how quickly it crystallized, what the overall texture is, firm and pasty. So this is essentially what a profile evaluation would look like for a honey. So we go through each one of the steps on how to evaluate the honey. We use a green apple to clean our palate, or a plain, these are like water crackers and plain water, no ice, no lemon. And this is essentially what a finished evaluation would look like for a sample of honey. And so basically, what I'm seeing is, especially after Appomondia, that sensory analysis is really what the future of honey is. People are going to start really embracing the unique characteristics, writing tasting notes and describing what they're tasting. I mean, this is very important, I believe, for marketing purposes, especially if you're a beekeeper where you're harvesting a few times a year. You may have a spring, summer, and fall honey, or even year to year. You want to be able to explain to your customers, whether it be at a market or on your website, giving them a description of what your honey tastes like could help them to make a choice and, to elevate it, partly because we know that commercial honey is pretty much flavorless. Commercially produced honey is often heat treated and blended, completely different animal than what beekeepers are producing. And eventually, this can be a path to identifying botanical sources, of, creating a profile of what a honey should look, smell, and taste like. So, I think this is a really, we're starting to see that more and more people around the globe are embracing this as a tool that anyone can use and learn to, evaluate their honey on the spot. And I think it's a really amazing program that was developed in Italy. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more, I do an online class. My next one is in January. You can sign up on the American Honey Tasting Society. And we're going to be doing a level 1 and level 2 in person here in Connecticut, where I am based right now. All of the information's on the American Honey Tasting Society website. And if you're really looking for more information, my books have some great information. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has about it.
Yeah, thank you, Marina. Um, as you know, you just scratched the surface. I hope it just piqued everybody's interest to, explore this further. And as I said earlier, I took the online version of the honey ta tasting course, where you get a kit with all these different, honeys to taste, but then other, just with the course itself, and it was fantastic. And I definitely want to do more of that. And just having a vocabulary, I like the way you say that, of the literacy around honey, and it will, I think, elevate all of us that produce honey, really what I'm after, and I mentioned honey stories in the chat there. Uh, what I've been after for so long is just to give us as beekeepers a tool to differentiate our honeys and to, yeah, just to give a way to describe it, to help our consumers, our friends, our family who we're giving honey to have the full experience of honey, because most of us who've interacted with the public with their honey, I've had lots of people say, "Oh, I don't really like honey," and then they have not actually tasted real honey, you know.
Exactly.
And so you can introduce them, and again, giving us tools to do that, and your mission, we're all in 100% support of that, and I'm sure we will come up with additional ways to collaborate, including the honey story that I mentioned. We have a way in there that you put tags on, the honey, your honey story of, and all these words. I mean, we need the words, we need the vocabulary, and so I'm anxious for us to continue to develop that tool for our beekeepers. And yeah, so I we're running out of time, so we're not really going to have time to answer many questions. But Marina and I will take a look at the questions that you've submitted and on the slide. She answered a lot of them, I think, and so we'll figure out a way to answer those. Maybe put it in one of our newsletters or something like that. But again, thanks, Marina, so
Thank,
much for yeah, for being with us. And
thank you.
let's see, is Danny out there? We had some trouble along the way.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I am here though.
Okay, there you
But
are.
yeah, we won't get to the rest of the questions. But if you are inspired by applying all of Marina's teachings and insights into creating your own honey story, we have a special discount for everybody who came here today that we'll send out to you via email. So keep an eye on your inboxes for that, as well as ways to stay connected with Marina if you haven't done so already. So yeah, we'll follow this up with the recording. And thank you again. That was such a great session. Learned a lot and a lot more to explore as we
Yes,
go.
and tell your friends that didn't come to the webinar, share the webinar recording with them as well. Again, we want to get this word of mouth out through your clubs, that sort of thing. So share this when you get it. And again, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you. When's our next one? Probably January.
Yeah, this one's the last one of the year, so we'll be back. Yeah, in the new year, last Tuesday of every month. So we'll see you in January.
And if you're at Nobby, come see Max and myself. There's a rumor that Max might be dressed up like a bee. I'm not sure.
Or a turkey, Thanksgiving turkey.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.
Hey everybody, bye bye.